Default templates are certainly one of the best things you can have to improve your workflow and save time, save energy, and focus on what's truly important, making music. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through one of my templates, one of my Ableton Live 11 default templates that I'm currently using, and give you all the tips you need to create templates of your own. And I'm also going to be including this template for free down below, so feel free to grab it. Thank you very much. Let's get straight into the video. This is how the Ableton Live 11 template looks like. I'm just going to walk you through the individual layers, starting from the top and moving along every individual track. So this template is best for genres like house, techno, but it's perfect for any other genre as well. I'm going to get into that later on. Our first track over here is called SC ducking. This is short for sidechain ducking. What it is an audio track. You create an audio track by hitting Ctrl-T, and you can rename this into sidechain or SC ducking as I did in the above. The reason this is so important is because this track enables everything to be a sidechain to the kick. What I mean by that is that whenever the kick hits, every other element is reduced in volume. And this gives electronic dance music, house, techno, or whatever really, that pumping effect. You can see there's a compressor loaded in here. I used one from the previous versions of Ableton. You can always hit upgrade to get the newer version, but I'm just going to leave it at this one. And we're just going to paste it here. If we want a channel to be routed into sidechain ducking, what we would have to do is create, let's just say we'll create an audio track over here. And instead of it going into the master, we want it to go into sidechain ducking, the channel that we've created right over here. Actually gonna rename this sidechain ducking 2 because this is our example, and route this into sidechain ducking 2. So whatever's playing here isn't gonna go directly into our master channel, but it's gonna go into sidechain ducking where the compressor is loaded. What's important for this sidechain ducking channel is that you always have it on input, so it receives audio. And what you also want to do is in this input-output section, you want to hit no input because you don't want any microphone or external instrument like your synthesizers to be routed in there. You only want the audio from your audio tracks to be moving into your sidechain ducking channel like this. For example, let's load up any type of sound. Gonna head into one of my packs over here. And if we, for instance, would put it here, this is how it would sound. And you can see the audio is moving into this channel. If we put it on auto or off, we're not going to hear anything. But if we put it on input, we hear the shakers moving into this channel. So whatever other effects you put on this channel, for example, the EQ, is also going to be applied to the audio that's in this channel over here. But since this channel is simply dedicated to our sidechaining, our pumping effect, we're going to leave it only with the compressor, so we can delete any other effect to keep it nice and clean. Now let's get to the second part of the compressor. We can open up the compressor by opening this knob over here. And you can see an extra panel, which is called Sidechain and EQ. This sidechain enables you to get audio from another channel, the trigger. In this case, it's our kick. So whatever's being played here in this kick channel is reducing everything in volume on this channel over here in sidechain ducking. I'm going to give you an example. Let's load up a kick. Look for one over here. Load it into this track. I'm going to get back into this track later on. But this is our kick track. So we have a kick that's playing on every fourth note right here. And you can see whenever the kick is playing, there's a little yellow dot that goes up and down. That's our trigger signal. So whenever our kick is being played, our shakers or anything else that's moving into sidechain ducking is being reduced in volume. And that gives us that pumping effect. So whenever we decrease the threshold, that pumping effect gets more intense, and you can see that in the gain reduction panel over here. Right now we have a really low threshold. This is our kick signal, by the way. And this is how much our shakers are being reduced in volume. So the audio is coming from kick, the sidechain trigger. And what I like to do is keep it on post effects. So whatever signals coming out of here after the effects is moving into our sidechain ducking. And you can see this EQ panel is also on over here. The reason I like to do this is because I only want the high frequencies from the kick to be triggering the sidechain, because low frequencies tend to fade out very long. And for the sidechain trigger, we usually want a very short and snappy signal. So the high-end frequencies of the kick do a great job. You can see we're rolling off the low-end frequencies here. And you can just dial down the threshold from here. From then on, what I like to do is play with these three knobs, the ratio, the attack, and the release. This determines how harsh your sidechain is. So if it's on 1 to 1, there's no sidechain compression going on. If it's on infinity to 1, it's basically blocking out everything at this point. So it's really harsh compression. I usually like to have a ratio about 4 to 1. That gives me like the most ideal result for compression. For attack, I don't do a lot. I mostly leave it at this panel here. For release, you can see how long the compression is being held for. So if you have a short release, the compressor moves back up very quickly. Just mess around with these panels and see what sounds best to you. And if we'd add another sound, I'm going to create a new audio track for this and look for an atmospheric texture sound. Like this one here. Reduce the volume. Already sounds quite cool, but if we reduce the threshold over here, you can see there's no sidechain compression going on. Why? Because we haven't routed this into sidechain ducking it. So we want to move this guy into our sidechain ducking channel. And now let's hear the result. There we go. There's a pumping going on. I usually like to keep the sidechain reduction around 3 to 4 dB. This is the ideal range. You can see there's a lot of sidechain reduction going on here. For organic house, for deep house, the sidechain isn't usually as strong as in genres like future house, bass house, dubstep. This is a very soft genre, so we want to keep it soft when it comes to sidechain as well. Cool. And you can also set the output gain over here. So having this sidechain channel set up and ready to go at the top of your tracks is essential, because you don't want to have to do this routing all over and over again each time you open up Ableton. You want to have this sidechain channel already done, ready to go. Because this pumping effect is so essential to dance music, you want to keep that in there. And even if you're into other genres, let's say hip hop, sidechain is also very important in that genre. So keeping a separate sidechain ducking channel here is essential. I'm going to mute the other layers that we previously created, send them back into the master channel in case we need them later on. And I'm going to move down into the drums panel over here. You can see that there are a few individual tracks that are within the drums track over here. And if we would hit Control, Shift, and G, we would ungroup those tracks. But since I want the main drums, which consists of the kick, the hi-hat, and the clap, to be grouped together, I select those hitting Shift, clicking all of them, like Shift, highlighting them, and hitting Control or Command G. And you can see those groups and subgroups are being routed into this group here. And if we rename this into, let's say, core drums, you can see that the routing is automatically corrected within the individual core drum layers. So our hi-hats, our claps, and our kick are moving into core drums now. And our core drums, we don't want those to go into sidechain ducking. Those are the only elements of our track that we want to move directly into the master. So we're going to keep it on master. every other element besides this is going to be moving into sidechain ducking. So the loops, the extra samples, the vocals, the instruments, the basses, the effects, and whatnot is going into a separate sidechain ducking channel. In this core drums track, we can find a kick layer. I created this kick layer by hitting Ctrl, Shift, and T to create a MIDI track. Within this MIDI track, you can see a few different plugins or Ableton stock effects already loaded up. If I would create an empty MIDI track, it would look like this. Ableton gives you the option to right-click a MIDI track and save it as your default MIDI track. So, whenever you load in a MIDI track, you already have these effects in here. The same is also applicable to an audio track. If you hit Ctrl and T, you create an audio track. And you see I already have two effects loaded up in here. You can hit right-click, save as default audio track. So whenever you create an audio track, you already have these essential effects loaded onto your track. And I always, in every case, keep an EQ and the utility plugin here. With the MIDI track, I always keep an extra pitch right before the plugin. So I can always mess around with the pitch in here, mess around with the individual notes. This saves up a lot of time and increases your workflow. But to get back to the kick, I'm going to create the MIDI track again and load in a so-called drum rack. So you can either find this drum rack under the drums panel here, drum rack, or head into instruments and find it here as well, drum rack. You can either double click or drag it onto your MIDI layer over here. And you can see your drum rack right here with these individual pads loaded up. And let's say, for instance, I would want to choose a kick, but I don't know which one to use yet. And what I'd do is I'd normally go through my kicks pack and I'd have an idea of a few different types or styles of kicks that I'd like to use. There's one called minimal, which I like. Sounds quite minimalistic. There's one that is more acoustic. And there's one that's rather harsh, like a heavy kick. So I'd have a variety of different kicks within drum rack. And as you can see in the track above, there is already a MIDI track loaded in here. If I select this region over here and hit Ctrl-Shift-M, I can create a MIDI clip. And within this MIDI clip, you'll see the kicks from your individual pads. And I could draw in some kicks from here. But since for house music, we want our kick to be played every fourth note, I hit right-click, fourth note, and what I do is just simply draw in the kick. Highlight them, hit Ctrl or Command D to duplicate them until the end. And if I'd like to hear the kicks that I'm drawing in, I can hit these headphones over here. And I can drag the kick to the position that I'd like it to be. Cool. So having this MIDI clip already set up in your default Ableton Live session will save you the time of creating a new MIDI clip, right-clicking it, heading into fourth bar, and drawing in your kick every single time. You can even go as far as load up the kicks that you love the most in these panels over here. But for the sake of creativity and being free, I always keep this empty. So no kick is loaded in here. I always like to start completely from scratch and choose my kicks from the beginning of the track. But I'd always leave this clip in here because I mostly create my tracks in 4 to the floor with the kick on every fourth note. So there we have our kick. For now, I'm going to delete this track because I've already loaded it up in here. You can see on this kick default track, this drum rack, I have a few different effects loaded up, an EQ8, a compressor, and the utility plugin. From then on, I'm just going to move down into the hi-hat panel. You can see there's a MIDI clip for hi-hats called Hat 1, and this hi-hat is played on every 8th note, which you can find here. If I hit right-click and put it on 8th, it's already on 8th note now. I can put the hi-hat on every second eighth note. And right now it's on C3. That's the default pitch that we want to keep. So if I, for instance, go into one of my packs and look for a hi-hat, drums, one shots, hi-hat. Let's look for a closed hi-hat here. This one's pretty cool. I can load it up into this track over here. So remember, this is a MIDI track. Create those hitting Control or Command Shift T. Control Command Shift T. And there we go. We already have our basic groove here. And you can reduce the volume of the hi-hat here. And let's say I'd like to add another hi-hat. What I could do is I could hit Control D to duplicate this hat, and I could rename it to hat 2. Let's say we want to open a hi-hat now. And then from here I could fiddle with the individual parameters from the sampler. Cool, but I'm pretty happy with hat 1. After hat 2, you can see there's a clap layer over here. There is a clap on every second fourth beat. So if we hit right click, head into fourth, you can see this would be the kick, for instance, and this is the clap. So on every second fourth beat, there's a clap. And I already have this clip created to save the time. Let's say we're looking for a clap. Okay, this clap's pre-shifted by 7 milliseconds. So I'd like to drag this one in. Pre-shifted by, you can open this panel right over here. This is the delay panel, which is the small D, the small D over here. And you can just pre-shift it by -7. So now this clap is pre-shifted by -7 milliseconds. And what I'd like to do in some cases to have more control over the claps is create an audio track. So Control T. Open up that audio track, head into fourth bar here, zoom in, and let's say we like this clap over here. So I'd put it on the second fourth beat here, right, like this, hit shift and zoom in, and I'd pre-shift the claps. Now I want to go off grid, so I hit Alt. Slowly pre-shift them and let go. So I pre-shifted every individual clap to my liking. And with this audio track, I have a visual reference now. And then I could simply shorten the clap like this, depending on how I wanted it to be. I can even go very surgical by cutting the sample like this. And then delete other claps like this. And you see I'd always get back to this panel. You can use the adaptive grid, but I mostly like using the fixed grid over here. And then I duplicate the clap. Oh, falsely duplicated it. This would be correct. And by hitting Control J, you can consolidate the clip. This is how it sounds like. Cool. So having a default MIDI clip and an audio clip in some cases can be really, really beneficial to increase your workflow. So I already have a default claps, a hi-hat layer, and you can see the claps and the hi-hats are going into a separate group. So let's say we don't have this group here. These are both of our claps. I'd hit Control G. And now before they're going into core drums, they're moving into this group here. So I'd call this one clap GRP for clap group. And then let's say I could add another compressor here, a glue compressor. And what this would do is just literally glue the claps together. So the dynamic range is decreased to an amount where it feels like it's being played together instead of separately. Just decrease the threshold. Increase the makeup gain. And these group tracks, I'd always have some type of glue compressor loaded because glue compression is pretty cool on group tracks. It enables you to make it feel like it's literally glued together. See, on every individual group track, there is a glue compressor loaded. Cool. underneath the core drums, you can see there's a loops track. This loops track, I use it mostly for drum loops. So let's say I'd like have this core drum loop going on, which sounds cool, but I'd like to have more detail to the drum groove. And I'd go into one of my packs and simply add in these loops here. And I can test out different stuff here. And with this gain plugin or this utility plugin, I can always change the stereo width, the balance, the gain or the volume. And I can always go back into the sidechain ducking channel and reduce the gain here. This loops channel is very simple. I use it for drum loops. Within this samples track, I mostly use it for ear candy sounds, like sounds that are being played as details. Some tracks that don't have to do anything with drums directly, I would move them into the samples track. So let's say I would have something like this synth or instrument fill. I would put it into samples, just to give it a bit of a different color coding and enable me to have a better overview of my session. So pretty simple, just 3 audio tracks that I created that go into a separate group track called samples. Right underneath here, I have a vocal track. So you can imagine everything that sounds like a vocal is being put in here. I like to have vocals separately in one of these tracks to give me, again, a nice overview of my session. So if I, for instance, would go into vocal and I'd have this vocal sound, then I'd put it into vocals here. I'd decrease the volume. Just as an example. And this Vox Rec In, this is a track that I use for vocal recordings. If I'd have like a singer or I'd like to sing on one of my tracks, then I'd instantly have this default audio track set up. What this is basically an audio track. So I'd hit Control T and select the microphone. So right now I'm using this microphone to record into OBS, so I'm not using it in Ableton. But if I'd like to use it in Ableton, I would hit external input and select input 1 or input 2, depending on where your microphone's set up in your audio interface. And I would hit input here, or auto also works for vocal recordings. And on this vocal channel, I have a few different effects loaded in here. A simple low cut filter, a reverb for some extra vocal reverb processing, and a 4-bar delay. That's it for the vocals channel. Instruments. The instruments group consists of 3 individual MIDI tracks, one being this green one called external instruments. And I have an external instrument loaded up in here, as well as a few different effects. This enables me to use my external instruments or my synthesizers. I can send out the MIDI to the synthesizer or receive audio from the synthesizer into Ableton. But right now I'm not using it, so this track would be disabled. But if you have any external gear, this external instrument track really will help you out. Other than that, I have a few MIDI tracks for instruments. Let's say I would like to use a software synthesizer like my favorite plugin, which is called Diva. Then I'd simply load it into this instrument MIDI track over here. And I would start playing around. So I hit this record arm button here. And I could instantly start playing, and that enables me to have a quicker workflow. You could even go as far as load in Diva into one of these tracks and include it into your default Ableton Live session, but I'm not going to do this because, as I previously mentioned, I like to start completely from scratch. So not having any Diva presets loaded in enables me to have a more free workflow. But in this case, I'm going to leave the Diva preset here. And by messing around with the pitch, you can either increase or decrease octaves. So by hitting Shift arrow up, you can change the pitch, which is really practical because then you won't have to move into your MIDI clip here and draw in your MIDI notes and move them along in this panel. this gives you a simple way to do that. Cool, those are the instruments. Right underneath the instruments, I have a basses clip, which consists of 3 individual MIDI clips again. One having this hip-hop sub-bass default Ableton Live rack loaded in here. It's basically just a simple sine wave generator, and since sub is used in every track of mine, it's default. As I mentioned previously, I don't like to add software synthesizers already loaded into the MIDI tracks, but for sub that's an exception because sub is just essential. I feel like sub is, no matter how or in what creative direction you go, sub is always there, which is why I included it in this Ableton template. And you could hit record arm and start messing around with the parameters over here. And you can change the default parameters here and create a sub bass that fits the rest of your track perfectly. And if I would want to use a different instrument or software synthesizer for my sub, I'd just simply load in a plugin from my list here. I would, for example, use Diva, load it into a MIDI track, and create a different sub pattern. So if I would go into the sub pattern here by creating a MIDI clip, I could start drawing in notes. Let's say I want to use a different plugin. I could move this MIDI clip down to this clip here, to this MIDI track. I would load in Diva, and I could start messing with the sub sound, but this time not in the hip hop sub bass layer, but in the Diva sub bass layer. So having this set up really improves your workflow. Having this already fixed in your default template is valuable. One of our last group tracks here is effects, and as the name already implies, this is best for effects, transitions. So if, for instance, I'd have a track going on like this, and I'd like to have some type of transition effect, I would always load it down into this effects track over here. And this basically consists of 3 default audio tracks that are moving into a effects group. So let's go into the Ambiente Transitions pack and choose some type of transition like this one. Then I put it here, just drag it to where I'd like it, decrease the volume. Cool, so effects go into this channel over here. The last but certainly not least track is the master channel. The master channel, I mostly keep it very, very simple. I don't like to add too much processing to the master channel because that can oftentimes really move your sound into a direction that you originally didn't want to have it. So keeping it simple, keeping it clean in the master channel is definitely essential. On the master track, I have this EQ bass low cut mono preset loaded in. So what this does is it removes all the bass frequencies beneath 35 Hertz, because beneath 35 Hertz everything is just low end rumble that'll just distort and create phase issues in your mix, so you don't want to have those frequencies here. And if we head into MS mode, hit this button over here. Right now we're in M mode, so we can see we're applying this to our mid signal. But if we hit S, if we press this button here, you can see the side signal. So what we're doing is we're reducing or completely cutting out the bass from the sides, because that'll just cause mono compatibility and phase issues. So removing the sub from the sides at around 100 Hertz is perfect for a clean mix. You can see there's just a slight boost in the 10K region to add some high frequencies to the sides. And there's a roll off towards the very, very high frequencies, about 22K Hertz, which is basically almost not noticeable. But for those high fidelity freaks, this might do a bit of cleaning up. So this is always in every master channel of mine. After that, you can find an OTT. I go very, very, very careful with this, because this can either like really, really distort your mix if you go too harsh. But I'd usually dial down these knobs over here because I have my default setting loaded up for mastering, which I'm pretty happy with. So I dial down the high frequencies, the low frequencies depending on the mix, and I would just then play around with the amount, and I'd usually go for about like 9 to 15%. I don't do a lot of processing with OTT because it tends to sound very aggressive. It really boosts those high and low frequencies a lot. Then I'd add a saturator to just emphasize some harmonics in the mix. Utility plugin, just in case I need some like extra volume regulation here, and a limiter to increase the overall loudness of the track. And as you can see here, I have a sub checker default. This is a technique I learned from Mr. Bill, so shout out to Mr. Bill. This enables you to check your sub bass at what level it is. So if you'd like to have a reference track, you could also add a reference track here and route it to here to see how loud the sub bass is in the master and how loud your sub bass is. So if you have a reference track, you could disable all these previous effects and check how loud the sub bass is. And for your track, you could re-enable all these effects and check how loud the sub bass is again to reach that similar loud sub bass standard. And that's basically it for this live template. All the way from the sidechain channel to the core drums to the drum loops, the extra samples, the vocals layer, the instruments, the basses, the effects, and finally the master channel. So that was it for this video. If you liked it, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. It does help me out and it helps me provide you more content like this. And if you like this Ableton template, you can grab it in the description down below entirely for free. So feel free to do that as well. If there's a tip that I can give you along the way is try out different Ableton Live templates. Mess around with different variations and create what suits you best. It doesn't definitely need to be one certain template that you use forever. Create some templates for different genres perhaps. Stay creative, enjoy. Thank you very much for watching. God bless. Peace. Making music. So in this video